Hello, what's up, guys? This is me, and I'm Rebel, and I'm joined with Tiny Potato today, not Tiny
Yeah,
Elephant. Let's not confuse the two.
the better
Uh,
Tiny this week.
oh, he's not gonna like that. Um, and it's just us two. We don't have a third, unfortunately. But we're here with our fifth week of Prospect Plebs. I kind of dubbed this one the Potato League edition because Tiny
Oh yeah.
Potato. Also because it's out super late and it's super hasty, but we're still gonna get it out to you guys, so it's fine.
Yeah, so some behind the scenes, I actually messaged Rebel the first week of Prospect Plebs and said I needed to be on the podcast. And I told him, because we had a game against Galley Mimas coming up, I told him whenever we clap Galley, he needs to put me on the podcast. And then that week we didn't drop any games against Galley because it was the Monday where all the games were postponed. And then 3 weeks later we got swept. So
So he was like,
but here I am anyway.
technically, we didn't lose any games to
Yeah,
Galley, so I
technically
should
we didn't
say.
lose anything to Galley that week, but but here we are. So I'm excited, man.
Okay, so right now we got the week 5 rankings, power rankings coming in, and not much has changed from the previous week. I think Zomberries hopped up a spot or two, and Sparks did the same.
hmm
But as we see, as we're getting on further throughout the season, the rankings are getting more and more consistent as we're seeing like what teams are actually like deserving of where they're at and what teams are starting to shake as we go on. So I don't think there's a whole lot to talk about. There's a lot more shake up in the lower half of these rankings, and I guess that's a little bit more to be expected because, this is the top 16, but the lower half of the top 16 is still like the middle of the pack of prospect in total. There's only 28 teams, so
Yeah, and I'd have to agree with you. I think the biggest surprise for me, at least this week, was Zomberries, and maybe I just haven't been paying that much attention. But them kind of coming out of nowhere to 3-1 Galley, I think
yeah,
was
and
huge.
we'll
We'll get to
get
that
into
when we
that,
get
but
to the matches. But I think them hopping up is really cool. But yeah, like you said, a lot of the top teams have really pretty much settled, and so from here on out, it's mostly just going to be kind of weeding out who's going to get those, the specific seedings and who's going to really get those last couple playoff spots. But I think for the most part, yeah, at least especially those top three are pretty much set at this point, and it's just kind of a fight to see who gets the rest of the spots.
yeah, definitely. Um, and we'll talk a little bit more about Zomberries later on, but they did kind of just I don't even know if they were in the first week's top 16, and I know the first week isn't going to be super accurate, but
hmm
like I think they've just kind of came out of nowhere, and over the past few weeks have gotten better and better to the point where now it's like, hey, we all need to start paying attention to this team.
Oh, for sure. They've definitely been popping up on people's radar, and I think they've taken a lot of people by surprise. But having played against a couple of those guys recently in either different tournaments or six mans, like they're legit, they're fast, and I think they definitely are a team that's gonna be able to give some people some runs here going into the end of the season for sure.
Yeah. So let's move into the outcomes for Monday. Uh, Here we got a couple 4-0s. We got Compost Bin 4-0ing Templars. We got Snow Owls. No surprise with Snow Owls showing up strong on Monday. And
hmm
then Dolphins 4-0ing Spartans. There's quite a few 2-2s and some 3-1s as well. But one thing we want to point out is there were quite a few teams between Monday and Wednesday that did fairly well. Dolphins, Snow Owls, and Firecrackers all were taking care of business this week when they all went 7-1, so they've dropped one game over all 8 games they played this week. And they weren't just playing easy teams either. Like you had Dolphins playing Spartans, which they're competing to get into the playoffs. I think before this series, Spartans was actually at the cutoff, and Dolphins kind of kicked them out.
hmm
And then if we look at um Wednesday here, we have Snow Owls playing Gorgons, who's also one of those teams that's right there at the cutoff for playoffs, so they're a decent team. So yeah, all 3 of these teams are showing up pretty strong and for week 5.
Yeah, and I think specifically Dolphins and Firecrackers with their 7-1 weeks kind of coming out of nowhere and really pushing themselves up into the playoff hunt and giving themselves a little bit of space. They both now sitting at 22 wins. They're about 3 games ahead of the next best team on the solar side. So they're really making some space for themselves. I know Firecrackers still really clicking with the roster changes they made a couple weeks ago. So they're really pushing up. And then, yeah, I think Snow Owls, obviously we expect them to
Yeah.
show up there
So
really
so so
just
maybe this
destroying
really
people.
so maybe this really strong week for Snow Owls is a little bit more expected, but yeah, Firecrackers and Dolphins, both of those are teams that are competing to stay in the playoff running. They're I think actually they're both in the Solar Conference, and they're both last and second to last, and right now currently for standings for playoffs. And so if they drop a series, either of those two teams could easily drop out. So it's really good to see that they're showing up strong.
Yeah, and I think the biggest surprise overall this week is Galley going 50-50 for the week, which is obviously like the first ever. They went 500 this week with a 3-1 on Monday and then getting 1-3 on Wednesday. So I think that's a big change, but I mean they're still pretty comfortable at the top. They've got a few games left to make sure they maintain that, but it's definitely a surprise this week for sure.
hmm And speaking of Galley, let's look at Zomberries for a moment, right? So this week, Zomberries had what seemed to be the toughest week in Prospect in all,
Yes.
playing both the top teams from each conference, Gallimimus. I've learned that I've been saying that wrong, and I'm going to try to do better. But yeah, they played Gallimimus on Wednesday, and on Monday they played Wobegongs. Did I get that right, or was it swapped? Let's see right here.
Yeah, they
No,
2-2
it was
Wobegongs,
Monday.
and then they 3-1 Galley. Yeah.
So yeah, not only surviving what seemed to be the toughest week, but almost thriving. They 2-2'd the long-standing, undefeated. They lost their first series to Mambas, but I don't think they had lost another series up until this week when Zomberries took one from them. And then
Yeah, and I think at best, like going into a week like that, at best, you're hoping, all right, maybe we can scrape a game here, a game there, maybe we can 50 for the week. But no, they ended up going 5-3, and I think that's huge for them. And I'll be interested to see if they can keep it up, if they can keep pushing, possibly challenge Galley for that top spot as we get here in the last couple of weeks. I think
well,
they're definitely going to be a team to watch if they can kind of keep that momentum going until we get to playoffs. Like that would be, that'd be huge for them. That's a great time to get hot for sure.
And I kind of made the deal to Tuxedo Marks kind of jokingly, because I almost didn't expect a 50-50 week from them with the schedule that they had. But I told them, I said, you guys go 4-4 on the weekend. I'll put you guys third on my top 10. And I guess they took that pretty seriously, and they excelled. They went 5-3, and so that gave me some interesting decisions I had to make for my top 10. So I think we'll enjoy the top 10 rankings this week. Tiny Potato, you don't have one, do you? I know we didn't create one for you as your guest, but we
No,
still
I have some rough ideas though, and I think seeing the stuff you guys have, I think my stuff is pretty similar to y'all's. But I think Zomberries definitely earned a spot up there at the top. Maybe it's a little early to put them top 3. I think personally, I'd like to see if this week they just happen to be super hot, and then if they die down, in this coming week, then maybe it was a bit of a fluke. But if they can keep that up, then I think they definitely deserve a conversation at a minimum about the top 3, maybe even top 2.
And before we get into the top 10s real quick, one thing we wanted to look at were transactions for this week. And there wasn't much going on as far as players moving around, but one big thing that happened was Care Bears ended up cutting half their team and trading them out
Yeah,
for a new
yeah,
roster.
they were
And I
clearing
mean,
house.
after going on Monday, Care Bears went. Actually, Care Bears didn't win a single game this week. That's unfortunate. They played Snow Owls on Monday, so you get forwarded by Snow Owls, tough, it's no one's gonna expect you to maybe win that series, as they're one of the best teams right now. But once you can't come out of that series with a game, and then you go to Wednesday and you play Airbuds, who Airbuds is not one of the best teams right now, but they're a decent team, and then you lose a series to them. It's like maybe you need to start looking for some changes. So
Yeah, and I'd agree. I mean, getting 4-0'd by Snow Owls, there's not much you can do about that one, but they're a powerhouse of a team right now. But then you turn around after that and get 4-0'd by Airbuds, who are, a bottom middle Solar team. That's definitely, gonna leave some question marks. And so they made some big changes. And I mean, I'm interested to see if they can actually bounce back from that. I mean, they're currently 9 games out of the playoff cutoff, So I mean, they're going to have some exceptional weeks, and they're going to need some teams at the bottom end to really struggle over the next few game days. So I think obviously there's still a shot for them, but they're gonna really need some fast chemistry and some really just strong play over the next couple of weeks. So it'll be interesting to see if those dramatic changes end up paying off for them.
Yeah, and as of right now, there are a total of 5 game days left. So that's a total of what was it 20 matches, and their magic number right now, which is the number of games they need to win in order to clinch a spot, is 30. That doesn't mean it's impossible. That just means that number is relative to the teams around them. So that just means that not only do they have to win a lot of games going forward, but they have to have some teams above them start to do poorly. So
Yeah, exactly. Like it's definitely it's possible, but it's gonna need to be, kind of a perfect scenario for them to happen. But
but
I mean,
you know, I
hopefully
mean,
they can pull something together with the new team for sure.
but yeah, that's kind of the scenario that calls for you cutting half your roster, when you're at a point where it's like you need to do something, just not
Oh
sit
yeah,
on your hands.
yeah. It'll be interesting to watch for sure.
Yeah, so good luck to them. And we're going to hop straight into my top 10 first, since we don't have Elephant or Bonk here, but we'll still go over theirs. And I know Tuxedo Marks will like this, but my number one team here is Zomberries. And that's just because of the week they had and how they excelled at it. And I think going into the season, it seemed like either we just didn't pay a lot of attention or they just didn't get a lot of respect initially. But like week come and week go, we see that this team is having success and they're beating teams, and they've slowly crept up through the top 16. And now this week they played the top 2 teams, in my opinion, and you tied one and you beat the other. So what else can you say, So if they move forward into next week, like you mentioned earlier, and they start to struggle or something, maybe that's not a spot they'll hold for very long. But I think if they move into next week and they continue to do extremely well, then I think that just validifies this top 1 ranking.
Yeah, well, and I think looking back on their last couple of weeks, so last week, obviously they 5-3'd against easily two of the strongest teams in the league. Week before that they went 7-1. Week before that they went 500, and then the week before that was another 7-1. So I think they've definitely been hot, and I think they've definitely got the potential. They're on a really strong run, especially against the teams they've had to play. But I think, yeah, I mean, I think they could definitely earn the number 1 spot. I wouldn't put them there yet. I think they still have
Be careful.
some
He's
time
going
to
to create
prove,
he's going to create an anti tiny potato committee.
Yeah, Zomberries is gonna hate Tiny Potato. Galley is gonna keep hating Tiny Elephant. But that's just how it is.
Yeah.
We like to be controversial.
Well, speaking of controversial, I think I was one of the first to put Galley to put them on the top of my top 10, and this is one of the first weeks I've actually taken them down, and they're not even 2 here; they're actually 3. And I will admit this is somewhat influenced by the series, the show match that we watched on Friday with Wobegongs versus Gallimimus, and just watching that series, I thought that Wobegongs looked like a much more rounded out team. And being a solar team, I was rooting for Galley, and I was a little upset going into game 3, game 4, where it looked like it was just going to be a quick series, and I was rooting for them to pull off the reverse sweep, and it looked like they might have done it, and they got all the way to game 7, but they just couldn't close it out. So with the offensive stats that Wobegongs putting up and what I saw in that best of 7 series, I just had to give the edge to Wobegongs here.
For sure. Yeah, that was a crazy series to watch. Wobegong, like both of these teams, just with so much offensive power. And then in that last game, game 7, Wobegong's just turning it on and taking the win. I think definitely, at least for us on the solar side, showed that Galley's not, invincible. Like they can be beat, which is kind of something that I think a lot of us go into matches against them with that idea in our head that they're that much better. But I think being able to see another team just keep up with them that well, I think was really eye-opening. I think Wobegongs definitely, if they can keep up that level of play and that momentum, again, heading towards playoffs, they're in a really good spot.
And I do want to point out that I'm not just trying to suck up to get this anti-rebel committee removed to Zomberries, and they would have been ranked 2 here, but Wobegongs dropped a series to Sparks. It was last week. They went 1-3 against Sparks, and while Sparks is a good team, we've scrimmed them before, and I know scrims don't mean a whole bunch, but they're definitely like I don't think they're a top 3 team. So for Wobegongs to drop that series. Kind of, when you tie with what I think to be one of probably the best team, and then that best team also drop a series to, like a more like middle of the top 10 team, it's like, what are you going to do, So I did have to give the edge to them there. But just to continue on, rounding out my top 5, we got the typical Snow Owl and Sparks. And then we have a new 6, which is my team. I like to joke with my teammates about show me a team we can't 3-1, because we've had a number of 2-2s, but majority of our series have been 3-1s. We can't get a sweep for some reason. So we'll just continue to 3-1, I guess. As long as that's what we're doing in the playoffs, that's going to work.
Yeah, I mean, a 3-1 will work every time. You guys have gotten yourself up into the top 3 now in Solar, which, I mean, is no small feat. Like, you guys definitely deserve to be up in that conversation. You guys have been really lighting it up these last couple of weeks. I mean, you 3-1 Kappas, 3-1 Uruks. Like, that's like, yeah, those are teams who may not be at the top, but I mean, still, just being able to keep that level of consistency, constantly be keeping yourselves from getting swept, even. That's huge, and you guys, it's really paying off. You guys have the record now to be able to sit that high. So I think you guys are definitely going to be a team that's going to cause some people some problems.
And we'll see how much weight this the 6th spot carries tonight, because we actually play Firecrackers tonight. And as you see, Firecrackers is rounding out my top 10 there, which they were a very highly rated team and very much anticipated to watch them play coming into the season. And they kind of fell off, but they made some trades. They got their stuff together, and now they're performing like we thought they would. So I think it'll be very interesting to see how we perform against them tonight, and that'll be very telling in my opinion.
Yeah, you guys play them tonight, and then they're coming up against Drizzle on Wednesday. So it's going to be a huge week for them. If they can pull off 2 wins there, they could really mess up our weeks, Rebel. But no, like, I had that note too. They've done an amazing job the last couple of weeks, coming back from a pretty rough start, having some roster changes, and I think they're definitely, I mean, they definitely have potential. They can definitely give teams a run for their money. And I think this week is gonna show a lot. They're playing we've got even just Firecrackers playing your team, Nebula, my team, Drizzle. Like, that's 3 teams that are all in the top 6 in our conference, who are all, just a few games safe in the playoffs race, all going against each other. So that's going to open up a lot of potential for those guys that are just 4 or 5 games out, that are kind of on the edge right now, to be able to try and scratch their way back in. Because, I mean, at some point, one of us has to lose some of those games. Like, it's not like we can all just go and get sweeps this week. So I think that's going to open up a lot of potential for those teams that are just outside, to be able to come in and possibly sneak a spot in if one of us gets knocked down.
Yeah, and that'll be super interesting. Also, if Firecrackers goes and just edges out a win from both of our teams this week, and they pull a 6-2 week or something, then it's like, well, where are Firecrackers in this mix? Are they like right up there with Sparks in them? So and at that point, if they did that, then it's like, now we got two teams, my team and your team, that are at the bottom of the kind of playoff contention race.
For sure.
Yeah,
I think anything can happen this week, because we have a lot of those, and I think we'll get to it in our matchups for the week. But we have a lot of games that are between teams that are right there on the edge, and so I think any combination of games in the next couple of weeks, and we could see some pretty big changes in these pictures of the bottom 3 and bottom 4 in each conference, really.
And so we're gonna hop into Elephant's top 10 real quick, and we'll briefly go over those. And so he's also got Zomberries at number 1, I think, for similar reasons that I do. And he's got Galley at 2, Snow Owls, Wobegongs, and Sparks to round out his top 5. And then he's got my team again at 6, but I think that's mostly just to pad his stats when he beats me this week. So,
That's likely.
That's a little bit insight to the mind of Tiny Elephant for you guys out there that don't talk to him very much. He just wants his win to look better, but little does he know he's not going to. Anyways, then he's got Isopods. His team he rated a little bit higher than I did, and I think that's mostly from Pyth pressuring him. In
100%.
Yeah. Pyth said, every week I tune in to watch a podcast over a Prospect tier in a Rocket League private league just to see my teammate that co-hosts this podcast not rank our team top 10. So
yeah, well, and I think honestly, like, this is the first week where they might deserve it. Like, they've been really stepping up these last couple of weeks, so I think it'll be really interesting to see them in the next couple of weeks. But I think the way they're playing right now, they definitely deserve to be in that conversation.
Definitely. And he's got Pioneer and then Dolphins rounding out his top 10.
Okay, one problem I do have with his top 10 is he puts Pioneer on here, and Drizzle's nowhere to be found. But we 3-1'd Pioneers on Monday, so I'm gonna have a conversation with them after this is done.
Well, Pioneer is one of those teams, in my opinion, that have been really weird in that they've showed very strong against some teams and then not so strong against other teams. Like, we played them and we 2-2'd. I mean, I will put out there that I feel like we were having an off day when we played them, but that doesn't exclude the fact that they 2-2'd us. And then this past week they 4-0'd another team, but then they do very poorly against like you guys and a few other teams that they've played.
Yeah, and our series against them was pretty weird. So we 3-1 them, and like, we had a total score of I think there was a total of almost 30 goals scored between those 4 games between the two of us.
Holy shoot.
There was one game that had 13 goals. Like, there was a game where I'm pretty sure Drizzle won 6-7. So I mean, that entire series was just like one 20-minute long shootout. Like, it was crazy. But I will say they do have 2 guys now in SXD and Stealth King who are both primarily 2s mains. And when those 2 guys are on the field together, it is terrifying. They're both really comfortable in the air. They're both really fast players. They just have rotational problems since they are more used to playing in 2s. So when those guys are in stride, they're absolutely terrifying. But because they play more like 2s players, they do leave some holes. And I think Blue Eyes Thunder Thighs on our team was really able to capitalize on those, and he was able to drive some of those goals home in those openings to help push that score up. But yeah, they're definitely a scoring machine when those 2 are in stride. But they definitely have some, rotational stuff that they need a little bit of work on, but I know they're working on it. So I think they definitely have some huge potential there.
It's funny you mentioned that it being just a super offensive shootout between you guys, because when we played, it was very much a grudge match. I think a lot of the games had like the scores were like 3 points total in the game, or like
maybe our defense was just that bad that day. Both our defenses just weren't there.
Well, and a lot of our games that we've played have been grudge matches. I feel like we don't create as many opportunities as we should, and we just more so capitalize on the mistakes the other team makes. And along with that, we just play really good defense. And to me, that just results in a lot of low-scoring games that we can pick off 3 of the games out of the series at least.
Yeah, that's a huge point.
Yeah. Did you have something else you wanted to add?
No, I just think it's so strange, like their team comp, just because they can play that much faster, play that much stronger, and against us, I guess we're a more offensive team, driving the score up that high, and then to turn around and have games against a team like yours where you guys may play a little bit slower, look for those openings instead of trying to create and force them in. And have it tied up like that. But I think that's really just the differences in play styles and how different teams can go against each other. But I think it's always really interesting to see stuff like that and how it pans out.
Definitely. We're gonna look at Bonks here real quick before we finish out our top 10s. So he's got Galley at the top still, which I think he was. is weird because he was not the first to put Galley at the top, and then like midway through their reign, he kind of pulled them down to number 2 and then put them back up. So I don't know what's going on there. But he's got Galley, Snow Elves, Wobbegong, Zomberries, and Sparks, your typical top 5 we've been seeing. And then he's got Nebulung's Legends of Tomorrow, which he's the only one of us who still have Legends of Tomorrow in the top 10. It's just an interesting fact to point out. And then Isopods, Pioneer, and Wintergreen round out the top 10. And Wintergreen's been doing pretty good, but I think this last week, I'm not sure. I didn't look at their results specifically from this past week, but I think they kind of fell off a little bit this week. Don't hold me to that, though.
I am going to call Bonk out. His entire top 10 is literally just the standings in order between the two conferences. For like the top 8, his top 8 are literally just 1 through 8 on the standings.
Wait, hold on.
Galley, Snow, Wobbegong, Zongberries, Sparks, Nebulons.
Okay, so I guess Pioneer, Legends of Tomorrow, and Drizzle.
7. Yeah.
Well, so Isopods, Pioneer, Legends of Tomorrow, and Drizzle are all tied, but he doesn't have Drizzle in there.
No, he snuck a Wintergreen in instead of him. I'm going to have a conversation with him, too. He snuck a Wintergreen in instead of us.
So it's literally his top 10, or is literally just the standings, but he took
It's literally
you guys
just the
out.
standings with Drizzle removed. All right, Bonk, we're having a conversation, bro.
Oh, that's hilarious.
But yeah, I think at this point in the season, like that's a fair case. Like these teams have all shown that they belong where they are. A lot of them are still playing as well as they have been. Like none of them have had like a massive drop, and the standings just haven't caught up yet. Like they're all still playing at a really high level. So I think that's still like a fair assessment to make. I think all those teams are going to be powerhouses. They're going to continue performing. But yeah, I think it was just a funny trend I noticed as you were reading those off.
That's interesting. Okay, well let's go to the conference standing since we're looking at it right now essentially.
Yes.
But this is the Solar Conference right now, and we mentioned earlier that Dolphins and Firecrackers. I think we mentioned earlier that Dolphins and Firecrackers are both teams that are gonna be looking to stay in this playoff race, as they're the last 2 teams right above that cutoff for playoffs. And then we have Galley and Zomberries, who look to be pretty securely tied. Like Gallimimus, they have to win 8 games. Gallimimus, my bad. They have to win 8 games until they clinch a spot, and there's a total of 20 matches left. I don't see Galley not winning 8 of those. So, also Zomberries 13, and that number will go down as other teams start to lose here and there. So, I don't see Zomberries not clinching a spot. Our team, I still think that our team is probably pretty solidly in the playoffs. Even Legends of Tomorrow and Drizzle, but like that's when you're starting to get like to that lower half where it's like, depends on how teams do, Like even our team's not so much that clinched yet.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much Legends of Tomorrow down to Dolphins. Like it all depends on how these games pan out. And I think Compost Bins, Airbuds, Kappas, even Mambas could sneak up into some of those if one of these teams has an off week. Like we already said, you guys play Firecrackers, we play Firecrackers. Those are 2 games that, between those games, like there's gonna have to be 8 losses between those 3 teams. So like at some point, some of that is gonna have to balance out. And I think those types of games are gonna give a lot of opportunity to teams, even like Care Bears, if they can get some chemistry going. Like all these games within the top 8 could open up some opportunities for them to sneak in with that new roster possibly. So I think there's definitely a lot of movement that's going to happen with those. Unfortunately, looking at, I had it up somewhere else. Legends of Tomorrow has the toughest schedule coming up of all the teams left in Solar Conference. They have the strongest strength of schedule going forward, so they're really going to have a rough climb to keep that spot.
And that's part of the reason why they weren't in mine, or I think Tiny Elephant's top 10 either, is because while in the stats wise, they're towards the bottom of that top 10, I don't think that their schedule has been not as difficult as some teams in the top 10 so far, and it's about to get much more difficult, and I think that's about to maybe show a little bit more insight into how well this team can actually perform. And if they start winning series going forward in this more tough part of their schedule, then maybe they can creep back up in there for me.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that.
And if they don't, then that's like opportunity for these lower teams to hop back up into this playoff race. Okay, well, let's look at the lunar playoff race. And just so everybody knows out there, the playoff races are separate. It's not the league overall. What it is the top 7 teams from each conference, or the top half of each conference, get thrown into the playoff bracket. And I believe it's the playoff bracket is you have I think it's dubbed like a wild card week or something, but it's essentially the first week is a bye for I think the first 2 seeds or something like that, and then so you have seeds 3 through 14 or whatever playing that week, and then you have the rest. Then you have seeds 1 and 2 picking up in week 2 with the winners of the week 1 games. But yeah, here we also have like Wintergreen and Supernova, kind of in the same situation as Dolphins and Firecrackers. It's very parallel. If you look at the 2 conferences, you see like teams who are on almost identical situations across both conferences.
Yeah, and I think if anything on Solar, like we have, Legends of Tomorrow Drizzle at 23 wins, Firecrackers Dolphins at 22, and then we've got a 3 or 4 game gap down to Compost Bins and Airbuds and Kappas at 19 and 18. But on Lunar, they don't really have that same gap. 23, 22 wins, 20 from Supernova, 19 from Gorgons, 18 from Spartans. So they don't really have the same buffer that we do. So I think if anything, there's more opportunity for some of these teams to get switched around just because there isn't that much more space there. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for those teams that are just outside Gorgon, Spartan, Soul to be able to come in if they have a good week or 2 and knock Wintergreen, knock Supernova out of those spots and get themselves in the playoffs.
Yeah, so there's a lot more potential for shakeup in the Lunar side of things than there seems to be at this point for Solar. Speaking of which, our games to watch for week 6, we'll go ahead and get into those, are more oriented around the playoff race and games that are more impactful for the playoffs. And so for Monday, we have Spartans at Supernova, and then Wednesday we have Airbuds at Dolphins. And if you paid attention to the previous, and we can go back, Spartans, Supernova's the last team in the 7th team in the Lunar Conference right now, so they're the last team before that cutoff. And Spartans are 2 teams out, right? I mean, 2. So, that is a very impactful game. If Spartans are able to take a series 4-0 from Supernova, then that completely switches it up, because now Spartans are that last team.
Yeah, and I think that's another game that could easily, if that series goes 3-1, one way or the other, then that's a massive difference in playoffs. If Spartan 3-1 Supernova, all of a sudden those 2 are tied, fighting over that last spot. But if Supernova 3-1s Spartans, then all of a sudden, they've built themselves that much more of a cushion and they're that much more comfortable going in. Another note I had for this week that could affect their playoff spots as well, depending on how their game goes, is Pioneers are playing Gorgons that same day. And so Pioneers at 23 wins, Gorgons at 19. They're another 2 teams that are right there in that same playoff hunt. So depending on how that game goes, if Gorgons get swept and Spartan even just 2-2s, that moves them up, 1 more spot where they're that much closer to clinching that last playoff spot. Whereas, if Pioneer gets swept and Gorgon gets that win, or if they tie somewhere in there, then that keeps all those teams that much closer and might even turn into, making a playoff picture more similar to Solar, where you've got that many teams like all bunched right there by that cutoff. But yeah, I think both of those games are going to make a big difference for Lunar this week. So it'll be interesting to see how those pan out.
And there's a whole host of games and scenarios like that in the middle of the pack of each conference that we could watch, and we were only able just to pick out 1 for each day. I did notice there was a typo here. It says games to watch in week 2. I hope we're not in week 2 because it's felt like a very long season so far. I think it's games to watch in week 6.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. So if we look at Dolphins and Airbuds in the Solar Conference here, that's like a very similar scenario as Supernova and Spartans. They're both in the same spots respectively to their conference, and I think they're also at the same records as well. I think, anyways, maybe I'm wrong. No, Dolphins has 2.
No, I think Dolphins has 2 more wins. But yeah, so these are in the same spot. It's 7 versus 9, but there is like 2 more games difference there. So I think even if Airbuds gets the sweep here, Dolphins are then tied with their record. So that's kind of where that little extra space there under the cutoff right now is gonna come in handy for those teams. Like if Dolphin 2-2s this, then they keep a 4-game lead in the playoff picture.
And that's where that
think,
separation in the Solar Conference is causing that difference. Then
and I think the
Lunar.
other games, like we've already mentioned them a couple times, the games again, like between Drizzle and Firecrackers on Wednesday, between Nebulungs and Firecrackers on Monday, that's where those games are going to come in too, because the outcomes from those games could definitely impact those other teams' abilities to get in. Like if Airbud gets the sweep here, and then Nebulungs, Drizzle, and Firecrackers all kind of duke it out and split those records, and then they come in with another really strong win on Wednesday, then Airbuds could really bump themselves up into that playoff picture and potentially kick out, one of our teams who may not have a hot week. So I think there's still so much room for teams to change around, but I think Airbuds Dolphins is definitely going to be one that has could potentially have a really, really big impact on who makes it into those bottom couple seeds and who doesn't.
I completely agree with that. And it's just going to be interesting to watch this week.
For sure.
I do think we are at 36 minutes, so it ran a little longer than we were hoping for. But this was our 5th episode of Prospect Plebs. This was the Potato League edition. Thanks for watching. Go ahead and like if you guys enjoyed. Leave a comment if you want to suggest anything or anything like that. And we'll see you guys next week.